counterplay coming very quickly. So this again shows that one must be very careful and play the correct moves even when a winning position has been attained, or it can all go down the drain very quickly. So knight takes d2, and this allows La Bourdonnais rook takes g7 check, and the pawn falls with tempo, and this is the best move, but really it's too little too late. It looks tempting to play b4 instead, breaking the defense of the knight from the bishop here, but this allows a rook takes c4, which is diabolically bad for white, after queen takes d2 and bishop b6 with d5 coming next and a winning attack. So rook takes g7 check, now king f6, which is the only move to avoid a perpetual, as we saw earlier. White has a small initiative now with rook f7 check, but after simply king g6 is over, and black has many threats, not least of all simply knight takes c4 and king takes f7. So La Bourdonnais moved his rook away from that danger with rook b7, and if only he had the time to bring his queen into the attack, he might get good counterplay, but there's neither time nor an easy route for the queen to get at the black king. And this is a better move, incidentally, than taking on a7. It's tactically problematic. Knight e takes c4 unveils the tactical threat, because with the rook being on a7 of bishop b6 check, it's picking up the rook. So here white would have to give up an exchange along with everything else. The rook takes a5, but now knight takes a5, queen takes d2, knight takes b3, and black is going to win without much difficulty. So rook b7 anyway from La Bourdonnais, and now came knight d takes c4, which is a logical move that keeps everything clear cut and totally winning for black. All of his pieces remain protected and active, and he not only wins a pawn but gains the c file for activity after b takes c4 and rook takes c4. So what does La Bourdonnais go for now? He has at least achieved a rook on the 7th rank. If he could only get his queen into the attack, he might manage a swindle, which was a lot more common in the 19th century. So he played one of the best moves, queen b1, and suddenly black is faced with mating threats via queen b1 check. McDonnell responded with the very calm move bishop b6, which sets up some very nasty tactics on the white king, and La Bourdonnais wisely avoided them with king f3. Playing instead rook takes b6, a takes b6, queen takes b6 is simply losing after rook c2 check, king f3, and knight g2, setting up a mating net with knight h4 check threatened, and white will be forced to give up his queen to escape it. And playing instead queen b1 check is also rendered losing after bishop b6. Instead of a secondary exchange here, if queen g1 check, black can defend with knight g4 because it discovers a check on the king, and it's double check because it's check from knight on g4 as well. So because it's double checked, the king will have to move, and on the next move black is going to win the queen on g1. So it's a very nice little defensive move in the middle of a big attack from McDonnell. So king f3 is what La Bourdonnais played to avoid those tactics, but now McDonnell sets up further tactics with rook c3, and La Bourdonnais answered with queen a2, hoping at last for some decent counterplay with queen f7 check in the reckoning. Sacking the exchange as an alternative defense with the rook takes b6 is still simply losing for white. So how does McDonnell deal with the threat of queen f7 check? The answer comes with tempo, knight c4 with discovered check from the rook, and the knight had remained at e3 for 17 moves and completely dominated the game. White has only one decent response, which La Bourdonnais played which is king g4. If instead king e2, he loses after f3 check, king d1, the only move to avoid mate, and now f2 and a forced mate in 7, even if white sacks his queen with queen takes f2 here. Also losing was king g2 and now f3 check, which as before will force mate. If the king goes to the first rank, then rook c1 is mate, so he has to allow the f2 push with check and play king g3. He can play king h3 as well, but he will still have to move to g2 after f2 check from the rook in order to hold out for the last. So it makes no difference which square he moves to. The move before this one, he has to play king g2 now anyway. But now comes queening with check, king takes f1, rook f8 check, and a forced mate. White can put up as much resistance as possible with king e2, but now rook f2 check, king d1, knight e3 check, king e1, rook takes a2, threatening rook c1 mate, which white cannot stop. He has no king moves and his rook is unable to aid in defense. Rook c7 delays for as long as possible, but now simply rook takes c7. Any pawn move, for example h4, and black can choose between rook c1 and bishop a5 for mate. So that's why king g4 is forced after knight c4 check. So now comes simply rook g8. McDonnell gets his final piece involved in the attack on the king, and this spells curtains. The biggest threat being an immediate mating net with h5 check, forcing king h4, and then bishop d8, which is going to be mate. Bourdonnais saw this and had no choice but to give up the exchange with the rook takes b6, and McDonnell answered a takes b6. Knight takes b6 is impossible because of queen takes g8 check, king f6, queen f8 check, king e6, queen f5 check, king e7, queen takes h7 check, and good chances at winning the endgame. As before, black must be careful, one slip and everything is over. But McDonnell was a world-class player and was never going to make such a blunder. So, a takes b6, now king h4. White could easily resign here, but Bourdonnais was putting up stubborn resistance. This was an accurate move too. King f6 with check from the rook on g8 was going to force mate, but unfortunately for Bourdonnais, that is still the case now, and McDonnell knew it. He played king f6 with the immediate threat of rook g6 to h6 and a mating net, which is now forced in a maximum of 7 moves. Bourdonnais made it easier with queen e2. Playing instead queen a1, attacking the rook, changes nothing after simply rook c2 and a mate in the works. So queen e2 is what he played, and now rook g6 from McDonnell, which leads to a mate in 6, although strictly speaking knight e3 would mate one move quicker. So rook g6, now queen h5 to prevent rook h6, but now comes knight e3, threatening knight g2, which is mate. And now, on the 37th move, Bourdonnais finally resigned, seeing that there was no escape. This knight move means that the king is trapped at the edge of the board, and as a result there's nowhere to run. Even sacking the queen will not delay the mate, as the c3 rook can go to c8, and then h8 for mate, if queen takes g6 and h takes g6. Now, to delay as long as possible, white has to play queen e2, but now comes the rook h6 check, forcing queen h5, and now knight g2 check, king g4 is the only move, rook g6 check, queen takes g6 check, king takes g6 check. Any move from white, for example h4, and the pretty finish h5 and mate. So it was a fantastic game from McDonnell, who, despite losing all but one of the matches that this pair played, is still classified as one of the world champions of the Romantic era by some circles, and he's the only Irish world champion in the history of the game so far. and it was an incredible queen sacrifice, after which he played with computer-like precision to crush his opponent and allowing absolutely minimal counterplay. We can have a quick replay with the threatened squares highlighted, just so we can see it from start to finish without all of the side variations. So it was Queen's Gambit declined from about 180 years ago, and it's still the opening that top players use these days, although that was the accepted variation, and nowadays it's the declined variation 9 times out of 10. And a very interesting central position already after only 10 moves. It'd be very unlikely to see such a position nowadays from the top GMs. They don't take such risks, and with all the development of theory and everything else, it's unwise to do so. And Bourdonnais, he undoubtedly was the stronger player of the two, but McDonnell managed to get a good few games off him, and as I said, he did even win one of their 4 matches. So he was an absolute force to be reckoned with, as this game proves. The dynamic compensation he gets here for his queen is very great, and he showed excellent positional judgment. Once he got the advantage, he never let it go, and as I said, he played with computer-like accuracy, which wasn't totally unheard of in the 19th century. Morphy and other players often played with computer-like accuracy, but it was less common because they were much more aggressive players, and just went for all-out attack instead of seeing the subtleties in the position. So there we go, that's the final position, and a fantastic game from Bourdonnais. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.